First, let me say that I appreciate so many of our fellows come from Puerto Rico, and the images of the intensity of the hurricane have been hard to look at, and I can imagine for all of you an extreme stress. And if you have family there, you are currently in Puerto Rico and able to watch this, I imagine not, given the power issues. I just wanted to say that we hope that people are safe and sound. Second, it is National Postdoc Appreciation Week, and it's really important to pause for a moment and say thank you. So if you are currently a postdoc, thank you for all that you do. If you were a postdoc, thank you for those years of hard work. If you are now an undergraduate student or a graduate student and you think someday you might be a postdoc, thank you for what you're doing now and for what you might do in the future. It's a really important event. So last unit, when we talked in general about resilience and well-being, I challenged all of you to consider putting together a wellness collage, a reminder for all of us of the things that help us take good care of ourselves. And I said, if I got 100 submissions, either by posting on Twitter or by email to me, that I would make a donation to the World Central Kitchen. So thank you. I stopped counting at some point in the middle, and then I sort of estimated where we were at, missed some. So we are well over 100 submissions. What was so interesting to me about it was the perspectives that many of you shared about the exercise and how good a reminder it was, or how in the moment it made you feel so much more connected. And I noticed that I really benefited from just opening your collages quickly and taking a look. And so it really, I think, is a powerful exercise. And I thank you. It was really fun this morning to log on to the World Central Kitchen website and make a donation. So a lot of good work came out of your exercise there. So I just want to start with an important question. And that is, I'd like you all to pause for a moment and reflect on changes that you made that focused on your wellness and resilience. What did you do differently in the last 2 weeks? What did you explore, consider, get back to? And we're going to use a program called Slido to collect the data. So you'll all get to tell us in a moment. So you just need to either go to slido.com and put in number Q450 or pick up your camera and go ahead and use the QR code. So just try to stick to one word. It'll make the Wordle a little easier, but if it's 2 words, no big deal. Just tell us what you've been working on. And as you're all doing that, I will answer for myself and tell you that the last 2 weeks, I had a chance to reflect on some of the points where I was not doing quite as well in recent times. And in particular, losing some elements of my exercise practice. And so it was great for me to focus a little bit more on being on my bike and getting outside and getting onto the tennis courts. So I really appreciate the reminder. Lots of cool things here. Exercise is quite large. Lots of people focused on that, just like me. Mindfulness, prayer, Pilates, friends, walks, positivity, gratitude, socializing. I mean, look at this. Just so many different cool things. I see a lot of people were willing, maybe they have been journaling all along. Maybe this was a new experience to journal. Stretching, I actually joined an online stretching community to work on some tightness. It's interesting. It really makes me slow down. It's almost a little bit of mindfulness as I go through the stretching. Crocheting, yoga, resting, deep breathing, focusing on the gains. Long walks. I'm going to let this go a little bit more because I think it's going to be something we'll come back to as a reminder as we move through. There are a few more people typing. I see somebody took a vacation. Some people have focused on sleeping a little bit more. Looking into therapy, right? It takes some time. Looking into is really how we start, because we want to do our best to find a good match and sort it out. Make sure that we go in prepared to have the experience we hope to have. So a lot of different things: exercise, journaling, meditation, and mindfulness, resting come up as some of the largest words, but lots of things said a couple of times. I just saw one come up: forgiveness, which I think is an interesting one. A lot of times we really struggle with that. How do we hold ourselves or others accountable yet forgive? And I think it's such an important part of how we integrate experiences and things that have happened to us. So I'm going to go ahead, and there's 3 people typing. We'll go ahead and let them add their say, and then Uli, you can go ahead and shut down the poll, and we'll bring this up. I see boundaries as we're moving out. Let me just say we'll be talking a lot about boundaries next time. Thank you, Uli. And Jackie, thanks for the coaching about getting that to work. So we introduced a really important model last week, that our thoughts affect how we feel and act. How we feel affects what we think and do, and what we do affects how we think and feel. And we laid out this model, and we focused quite a bit last week on behaviors, in particular behaviors that help us tend to our physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health. Today, we're going to dive much deeper into the thoughts element of this cognitive behavioral triangle. And we're going to also look a little bit at the interplay between our emotions and our thoughts. So we're going to work on both elements of that, remembering that we need to be both aware of the self-talk that comes along with the stories that we tell when we experience setback, when we have an interaction with someone that is alarming, confusing, not what we expected. We tell a story, and we really need to be focused on that story so that we can put it into perspective. So that's one big bullet that we're going to focus on today. And then we're going to put together with that elements of our emotional literacy, or our ability to understand how strongly emotions can impact our response to setback and disappointment, and ways to soften uncomfortable emotions in the moment so we can make good decisions. So we're really going to tackle 2 of the resilience bullets today. And we'll just start by saying that we are all storytellers. Like, we tell ourselves stories all the time about ourselves and our place in the world, about what's happening to us, about why it's happening, about what it means. And furthermore, we're also influenced by the stories that others have told us or are telling us. And these can be important people, right? We hear stories about us from family, friends, colleagues, teachers, mentors, bosses. Can be people that are important to us. It can even be people we don't know, or people we don't consider all that important, right? Issues that we read about, learn about, people giving us feedback about our work. And we sort of think, well, where did that come from? So sometimes it's not even somebody whose story, the story they're telling, we're like, where did that come from? We don't think you really have so much knowledge, but yet they often share sort of their views as well. So I want to make some points about the stories that other people tell us. And in this case, I really want to focus on people in our work and life circle whose opinions matter to us. Right. So we're telling ourselves stories about our strengths and our gaps and our setbacks and disappointments and where we might end up or not end up as a result of all of that. And at the same time, these other people are telling us stories. The stories they tell can drive, confirm, and amplify our negative stories. Right. So if we're telling a very negative story about where we're at and they are amplifying that story, it can make it very, very hard for us to reach out for support. The story we're telling is difficult and it drives us to want to hide. And they're amplifying the story, making us want to hide even more. Right. And then I'll give you sort of an example. A graduate student there's a lot of ups and downs in graduate school, and there's a very long period of time in the middle where the excitement is gone, right? The enthusiastic beginner stage is gone. There's no light at the end of the tunnel that I'm actually going to finish. Graduate students in that phase can start to feel really down on themselves. And if their thesis committee or graduate advisor or program director is, you may not finish. Look at these things that happen. Look at these gaps, right? That can amplify and make it even harder. The stories that other people tell us about us, they can come from all elements of our life. Sometimes people tell stories sort of inadvertently, right? They don't realize that they're telling such a negative story. They think they're giving us helpful input. We hear it as a very negative story. Sometimes there's some intentionality. Someone is frustrated with us and they, put into perspective some things they've experienced, and we think, I may not do as well as I'd hoped, making that our story even harder. These kinds of difficult stories can be related to toxic and bullying work environments or absent, difficult mentoring relationships. So sometimes it is embedded into the structure of a particular work environment. And I think it's very important to acknowledge that sometimes the stories that people tell about us are driven by their biases, whether they are conscious of them or not conscious of them. Right? They see an identity, they have a bias about individuals with that identity, and it drives some story. And I think it's really important to put into perspective that we are telling our own stories, others are telling stories about us, and sometimes they can amplify in very negative ways. A really key reason to acknowledge that is, we need awareness about that, so that we can dissect that kind of situation and put it into a perspective and decide how to deal with it. But the second reason we need to understand this is because the flip side is also true. So people's stories about us can drive, confirm, and amplify positive stories. They can help us tell more positive stories, actually. And that can make it much easier for us to reach out for support. That can be such a resilience building element of our relationships. So it's so important that we all find supportive colleagues, peers, mentors. Those mentors can be research-based mentors, but they can be non-research mentors. Someone on the floor where our research group is, who gives us some time and energy, talks with us, listens to us, asks us good questions. It can be career mentors we find through various offices at our college campus or here at NIH. It can be someone we met at a seminar and decided to get together with. An important element of our resilience, remember, is the people part. Why? Because they help us find ways to reach out for support by helping us find more positive stories, by giving us insight into ways forward. Other ways that we can find support, and as we're telling, sort of moving through the world with experiencing setback, telling various stories, affinity groups, clubs on campus, community in general, right? Yesterday, I participated in the NIH road race, and, I had this overwhelming feeling of being a part of something important. People were cheering and laughing and celebrating time together, encouraging people, even if some people were feeling like, oh, I don't know how this race is going to go. There was all this enthusiasm. Another place to find support, to amplify positive stories, to help us find positive stories, are the Resilient Scientist Series discussion groups. So I really want to stress, we spend a lot of time learning about the stories we tell about ourselves, but I really want to stress that that's one element that we really need to be aware of, the other stories swirling around us. So I want to just start with another Slido poll, and I'd like you all to center yourself and pause and take a bit of a deep breath, just a breath to let go of some of the stress of the day or the week. And I want us to start from a place of acknowledging that we tell some helpful stories, but we also tend to tell some unhelpful ones. And I'd like you to just for a moment focus on some of the helpful stories you tell about you. And so Uli's going to go ahead and activate the poll. And again, you can take another deep breath and just think about the stories that remind you of your resilience, of your strength, of your perseverance, of your talents, of the important things. I'm a fighter. I'm still learning. Those are two good ones. I have unlimited potential. I'm proud of where I am. I don't give up. I'm a hard worker. I'm worthy. I can do hard things. I've already done hard things, right? I think some of the things, I'm curious, curiosity. I'm a helper. I can be flexible. If I knew how to do everything, I'd already have a degree. I am who I am, and I can't do everything, but in an affirmative way, right? Yeah, there are some things I'm never going to do all the time with great ease, and that's okay. I'm tenacious. I'm enough. You don't need a PhD to get a PhD. I feel like we should capture that one. I deserve to enjoy the fruits of my hard work. I'm unafraid during difficult times. I'm learning. I can do it. And, just watch these. It's a little bit like the first exercise, where you just sort of get some positive energy in general from others. It's good when we focus on the helpful stories. And, it's interesting. There are also some hard things through these stories. I feel out of my depths because I surround myself with smart people. I've hit rock bottom before and gotten out, right? Some of these really helpful stories acknowledge some really painful, hard times that we've experienced. I'm okay. I figured it out. I'm proud. Great. Thank you. And hopefully we'll capture the last few as Uli transitions. Here's an interesting one, helpful story. I've hit the glass ceiling. It's time to leave. An acknowledgement of sort of what is and how I want to deal with it. I'm a valuable asset despite being imperfect. Why? Because everyone is imperfect, right? We're all imperfect. So a lot of helpful stories. Many of us have a whole bank of sort of helpful things that we can pull out. But the honest truth is that for many of us, there are some really unhelpful stories that we often get caught in. Often, maybe sometimes, but I think a lot of people would acknowledge that the unhelpful story often drowns out the helpful one. So I want you to reflect a moment on some of your unhelpful stories with the idea that as we become aware of the unhelpful stories, we can ask ourselves, well, where did they come from? Why am I still carrying them? Right? And what can I do to soften them, shed them, throw them away? So let's go ahead and activate another poll. What are some of the unhelpful stories you often or sometimes get caught in? I'm lazy. I need to be perfect. Everyone is doing better. I don't deserve to be here. And we're going to talk about imposter fears and that sense of not belonging. I may not be able to get a job. My privilege got me here. I don't belong here or anywhere. Can't make mistakes. I'm going to fail. I should be smarter. I'm behind. I don't have the ability to finish. Whole different energy in reading these. The thing is that all of the stories are a part of our day-to-day life. We tell stories that lift us up. We tell stories that make us feel down. And the idea isn't that we're ever going to be able to control the stories. The idea is as we become more aware of them, we will be able to put them into perspective. So in some way, we will control them by being able to place them into a perspective, let some of them go more easily. Sometimes I think just understanding where they come from helps, right? Just sitting with, why would I have gotten that message? I'm not capable of doing a PhD. Why would I have gotten that message? I'm not worthy. Where did that come from? I'm aiming too high, right? These are all things that can really hold us back. So I thank you for sharing. I think it's hard to share the unhelpful stories. Sometimes it's even harder for people to share the helpful ones. And so I decided this time to really break it up. I want you to just pause for a moment and reflect on the difference in how you feel in the moment, sharing the helpful story versus the unhelpful one, or reading other people's helpful stories versus the unhelpful ones. I think it's a really interesting act of self-awareness to not only pay attention to what the words were, but as you were reading the words or hearing me read them, how you felt. I just want you to remember this shortcut that we talked about last week. We can tell stories about ourselves that really tear us down. We can tell jackal stories, or we can tell giraffe stories, stories that build us up, that are more realistic. We can tell ostrich stories that are pretty unhelpful because they're ignoring the issues. In general, we walk through life telling stories, jackal, giraffe, and ostrich. Some of us tend way towards one of these types of stories. Some of us tend towards another. It's a learned skill to recognize our storytelling, and it's a learned skill to then work to soften, put into perspective unhelpful stories and to amplify in a realistic way more helpful stories. And so I encourage you to keep the whole concept of jackal, giraffe, and ostrich as we go through the rest of this. So we're going to dive into the stories now, and we're going to start with the ABCs put out there first by Dr. Albert Ellis and amplified in many ways through the literature, including Dr. Martin Seligman and others who work in the positive psychology field. So there are all kinds of activating events or adversities. We tell stories because that's what we do, right? So these events drive beliefs that come out in these stories, like I'll never finish, I'm not good enough, I'm lazy, whatever, right? All the things we put out there. Those beliefs amplify the consequences. Sometimes the adversity has a consequence on its own. We submit a proposal for funding, it doesn't get funded, the activating event, the proposal didn't get funded, it drives a consequence. We have to redo it or resubmit it, or we have to find funding somewhere else, or we have to change our plans. But the beliefs in there can drive even bigger consequences. Like, oh, I didn't get this because I don't deserve to get it. I'll never get it. I'm in the wrong field. I really, embarrassed myself. Everybody probably looking at me in big ways. Now the consequences are amplified because we have both the consequence to deal with and this really hard story to deal with. The honest truth is sometimes we cannot do anything about the direct consequence, but we have a lot of control over examining our beliefs about what happened. So our locus of control is examining our beliefs. I want to introduce remind you of a really important concept of cognitive distortions. And as we think about the beliefs, we're going to talk about various cognitive distortions. So we are creatures of habit. In every way, we are creatures of habit. Cognitive distortions are habitual ways that our mind convinces us of something that is not supported by fact. Now, often we tell distorted stories through an unrealistically negative lens. I will group those together as jackal distortions. As we tell very negative stories, we feel bad about ourselves, right? The more negative the story we tell, the more loudly we tell it, especially if it's amplified by others, right? We feel worse and worse. This can lead to feelings of anxiety and depression, right? So the more negative stories we tell, the more at risk we are. There are many factors that play into mental health, right? Our hardwiring, our biology, previous experience, trauma, right? So I don't want to present a simplistic view, but it's important to appreciate that as we tell unrealistically negative stories, right? It adds to the challenge of our mental health. Now, sometimes we tell stories through an unrealistically positive lens, and that's a really bad mistake. So I'm going to fix it in the moment. So sometimes we tell stories through an unrealistically positive lens, an ostrich distortion. Nothing here was my fault. It didn't matter. Everything will be okay anyway. I can just ignore that setback. It happened, but it'll never happen again. That leads us to ignore taking care of issues. Ideally, what we want to do is recognize our distorted thinking so we can tell more realistic stories about it. So we have to talk about recognizing cognitive distortion so that we can do this. Now, most people, as they hear this, they say, well, I tend to tell really unrealistically negative distortions. In general, actually, there's a language, automatic negative thoughts, because in general, many of us tell distorted stories that are especially or unrealistically negative. And that's because our brain has a strong primitive threat detection system, right? Our brain evolved to keep us safe. And so we're constantly scanning the environment for risk. And therefore, we're really good at seeing risk. We are not nearly as good as seeing the positive. Many of us tend to be much better at seeing the negative. So very, very often our cognitive distortions tend to come through an unrealistically negative lens. Now, the really nice thing here is that there are a lot of flavors of cognitive distortions. You learn about them, and that's like a shortcut to start looking at your stories. So I'm going to go through some of the really common ones, and I'll give you examples. I want you to pay attention as you hear me talk about this. Do you say, oh, that's me? In the dictionary next to this cognitive distortion would be a picture of me. And I just want you to pay attention to the ones that you really identify with. Another interesting thing is maybe you'll say, I don't do that, but oh, so-and-so that I work with does that, or so-and-so that I live with does that. It's interesting. I recognize my own. I also recognize my wife's cognitive distortions. I recognize some staff members' cognitive distortions. What's their general go-to distortion? And it can be very helpful in interactions. So pay attention really first and foremost which ones do I tend to use? But in the back of your mind, you might stretch a little bit more. So all or nothing thinking is our performance is either perfect or a complete failure. So we go to a national meeting. We're so excited. We haven't been in years because of the pandemic in person. We get to go. We present a poster. It goes well. Lots of positive interaction, but we had a few really difficult interactions. People asked questions that knocked us off our focus a little bit. We weren't sure. We stumbled. You get back later together with folks in your group and they say, how did it go? And you say, oh, it was terrible. That's all or nothing thinking. You see either the positive or the negative. Catastrophizing. That's when we exaggerate the implications of a setback or mistake. This would be my go-to cognitive distortion. So I'll actually pick something from this morning, just a simple example. I came in and my key was not in the door to my office, and usually it's hidden somewhere, and it wasn't there. And literally in 5 minutes, I'm not going to be able to get in. There's important notes in there. I'm not going to be able to get to my first meeting on time. I'm not going to get work done. It's going to be a terrible day. The lecture will go poorly because there's things I need to get done. Catastrophizing. So that's an example of another distortion. Two that I like to teach together, mind reading and fortune telling. Mind reading, we make assumptions about what somebody else is thinking. We send an email to our boss saying, we'd like to go away for 2 weeks and here's the dates and we hope it's okay. And we're pretty excited. It's a great trip. But we're a little nervous about what our boss might say. And we don't get an answer. And as we're sitting waiting to get an answer, time is passing. Oh my God, they're upset with me. They're angry that I want to go on vacation. They want to say no. That's mind reading. Fortune telling is very similar, except it's predicting the outcome of an event before it actually happens. So someone forwards you an application about an amazing summer program. You should apply for this. And oh no, I won't get it. That's fortune telling. Emotional reasoning. We assume our emotions are a true reflection of the way things are. I feel disconnected and alone today. I am disconnected. Nobody wants me here. In the stories, difficult or unhelpful stories, I saw some about, I don't belong in my group. My group doesn't want me, right? So on a given day, we feel disconnected. We feel that way. Oh, therefore it's a reality. I feel like I don't belong, so I don't belong. We make a mistake and we often use the word stupid, right? I'm stupid. I made a mistake. I'm stupid. I feel stupid, so I am stupid. So that's emotional reasoning. We take emotion as fact, as opposed to seeing emotion as a fleeting feeling that comes and goes, gives us a little bit of data, could be a warning sign of something, but it comes and goes. We say, oh, it's fact. Overgeneralization. We reach a conclusion about one event and apply it to all similar events. When I was in graduate school, I took my qualifying exam. I didn't pass. And I literally, A, couldn't retake it, and B, was terrified about every other exam. Well, I didn't do well in this one, so I am not going to do well in that one, that one, that one, or that one. We just take one setback and we stretch it to include everything that's similar. I applied for an internship and didn't get it. I'm not going to get into graduate school, right? We just take one setback and we sort of apply it, move it over to others. Personalization. We think the problem is fully under our control rather than considering other outside factors that caused or contributed to it. I've seen a lot of personalization happen during the pandemic. I'm not getting a lot of work done. My career is over. A little bit of personalization going right into some catastrophizing, as opposed to being able to take a deep breath and say the pandemic is really overwhelming for everyone. It's especially hard for people back at the start, people who had to be at the bench and suddenly couldn't be, right? Not being able to say, well, maybe I'm struggling with focus and I need to work on that, but there are all these other things going on. I've interacted with trainees, and I've had this experience myself of being late to a meeting because of the metro and not being able to pause for a moment and acknowledge I have no control over the metro schedule. Oh, I'm so sorry, I messed up. This is so terrible, right? A really not helpful story about it. One thing about personalization, we tend to think of it from that way of taking the blame. It can also be exclusively blaming someone else, rather than looking internally at other factors, right? So we submit a paper, it gets rejected. Oh, that reviewer and this reviewer, instead of pausing for a moment and saying, so what elements of this might they be right? Personalization is often when we take the blame, but it can be the other way. Discounting the positive, which is also known as minimizing. We discount positive outcomes and attributes and insist they don't count, right? Oh, whatever is good about us doesn't count. It's only the things that we struggle with that count. This is the distortion underlying imposter fears. So someone says, congratulations on getting that travel award. Oh, they probably didn't have a lot of applicants. That's minimizing. All right. So these are some, and we're going to talk a lot more about minimizing as we tackle imposter fears. But right now, what I want you to do, and I miss doing this in person because we would have people make noise, and it was such an illustration of how many of us struggle with these distortions. We can't do that, so we'll go ahead and vote using Slido. And I guess as people are voting, I'll mention that I did read the feedback from folks from last time, and some NIH fellows said, we really wish that this had been in person. I do too. We developed this when cases here were in high and NIH was not allowing in-person meetings. We also wanted to continue including folks from other places and people on every NIH campus, but we are anxious to get back to some in-person things. And we might do some of these later if things continue to look good in one of the auditoriums with video. So we'll do a hybrid. So as people are voting, we see that mind reading and fortune telling are high, as is discounting the positive. All of them, however, are showing up in a pretty large number of folks. I don't know, 200 and some people have voted already. We get a sense of how pervasive these are. The beautiful thing is, the minute we start to realize which ones we do, then we have some awareness and we can start working on it, understanding where it comes from, how we can sort of soften the distortion. So let's go ahead and give people maybe just 5 more seconds to vote. Almost always mind reading, fortune telling, and discounting the positive are up there. Catastrophizing and all or nothing thinking are also very often high up there. It's interesting to me to take the data from many different units and put them together, and maybe we'll go ahead and try to do that. So I want to make a few points about these distortions. These are common, normal, and they do not reflect something wrong with us at all. They're driven by a combination of nature and nurture, right? So there's some of this is about the hardwiring of our nervous system. Some of this is what we watched as we were in formative experiences in our lives. I realize I catastrophized because some really important people early in my life catastrophize a great deal. So I learned it from a very, very early time. You likely learned a lot of your distortions from an early time as well. All of us have our go-to signature distortions. Some people will say all of them overwhelm me at times, but here are the ones that tend to happen most often. Some will say, really, I struggle with just these few, and there are more than these. And so in both the workbook that we will get out to you for this unit and in online and in many articles, you can find lists of even more distortions. Another really important thing to appreciate is when we are stressed, when we are burned out, or we are feeling unwell for whatever reason, our distortions are magnified and amplified. I realize when I don't get a good night's sleep, I catastrophize much more than when I've gotten a good night's sleep. If I don't exercise, I catastrophize more. I also struggle some with mind reading, same thing. No sleep, lots of mind reading. Better night's sleep, I'm able to recognize and soften it. Now, we are telling these distorted stories. We have our cognitive distortions. When we engage with others, we need to appreciate that so do they, right? They have their own distortions that they tend to go to. Now, some are hidden and you might not recognize them. Some you can see right in the way they're engaging with you. You might recognize some catastrophizing, right? Somebody might give you feedback and you might think, whoa, that's some catastrophizing. In fact, recently in some feedback, someone in my office said a little less catastrophizing. And I thought, yeah, I agree. It's just not all that easy when it becomes so ingrained. And these distortions are ingrained. So it takes a lot of effort. Now, we're going to put off discussing what to do with distortions until we dive a little bit deeper into the concept of imposter fears, which many of you have heard of as imposter syndrome or as imposter phenomenon. I happen to like reframing these as imposter fears. The reason for this is fear, by definition, I think describes what's going on. So fear is an uncomfortable emotion that's caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous to us, that this could cause pain, it could be a threat, it could influence our safety. Now, there's personal safety, but there's also educational safety, career safety. So fear is the universal trigger for us trying to protect ourselves. Fear is triggered by the threat of harm, and fear triggers us to take an action that could help in our lives, that keeps us safe. The problem is that sometimes those actions, especially when it comes to educational safety, do just the opposite. So I think it's much more realistic to think of this feeling of not belonging as a fear, not that there's some ingrained syndrome or phenomenon, but that in the moment we feel at risk. So let's define imposter fears as first defined by Pauline Rose Clance, who is the researcher who first introduced this concept. This is the fear of being seen as not good enough, not intelligent enough, not capable enough, not creative enough, despite evidence to the contrary. Or said another way, despite evidence of high achievement. I do not belong in graduate school, even though I worked hard to get here. I do not belong in this room of people interviewing for this great institution, even though I had the credentials to get the interview. I don't belong here. I got this new position, but I didn't really deserve it, even though really it was a big interview process. So the key thing is there's evidence that we belong where we are. That doesn't mean there's evidence that it's going to be easy, but there is evidence that we belong, and we throw that evidence away by minimizing it. So this stems from the cognitive distortion of minimizing. And here's what I think is so important to remember. Imposter fears lead us to feel that we don't belong. We shouldn't be in this room. We shouldn't be in this job. We shouldn't be giving this talk. We shouldn't be preparing for this committee meeting. We don't belong here. The thing is that we need to feel like we belong if we want to take risks, if we want to learn, and we need to grow. We need a sense of safety. And this feeling of not belonging totally negates that feeling of safety. You know, to learn and grow and take risk, we are sort of on the edge of our comfort zone. But if we have a sense of safety, we can tolerate being there. If we don't have a sense of safety, we can't tolerate it. And that's why I think it's so important that we reframe this as a response to feeling threat in the moment. If we're at an interview, of course, we feel some sense of fear, right? This is high stakes. I really want to get in. Look at all these other smart people around me. We get into graduate school. Well, everybody else got in too. Oh, wow. These are really, high stakes, right? We're trying to accomplish really big things through our education and our research. And it feels to me very normal at times to feel like an imposter or to feel imposter fears. I want to look at the combination of factors that lead to imposter fears, and I hope that that will normalize them even more. So look at this first bullet, being a student, right? You are studying hard things, whether that's in a classroom or in the research lab, whether that is about mentoring somebody or learning a technique. We're students all the time. Research is about lifelong learning, so it makes sense that imposter fears come and go because we are always taking on new learning. Being in an environment that feels foreign to you. You start a new internship, you start graduate school, you start a postdoc, you start clinical rotations, you start first-year graduate school rotations, you move from one environment to another, that can trigger imposter fears. Messages that we get from family, childhood, organizational culture, from the broader society, these kinds of messages can trigger imposter fears. Growing up, if you always came home from school with, expecting to hear, why didn't you do better? You got a 90. What happened to those 10 points? Or maybe you always heard, oh, you're not the smart one, you're the funny one, or you're the athletic one. We get these messages that tell us that we might not be good enough. So it could be a message from childhood. It can be an organizational message. At NIH and at many universities, lots of people have lots of degrees, actually at all universities, right? And we're sitting around and we look at all the degrees people have and we start to compare ourselves because that's human nature. That sends a message we might not belong. There are so many societal messages about people of color, about women in STEM fields, about neurodiverse trainees who are dealing with various chronic illnesses and disabilities. So many messages about where and when you belong and where and when you don't belong. Those kinds of messages can drive imposter fears. Really playing into this concept of stereotype threat, which is the stress of representing your entire social group. So you've gotten these messages that you might not belong. You carry those messages, you get into an environment, you look around, you're in a computational lab, you don't see very many other women, and suddenly you're very aware as a woman that you're representing your entire group. Same for people of color. Whenever we look around and we don't see a sense of belonging echoed back or mirrored back for us, it can drive stereotype threat, which drives imposter fears. And then finally, one other cause of imposter fears is working in a creative field. So many artists have talked about experiencing imposter fears. And I think the reason for that is it's really abstract, talking about abstract with that piece of abstract art behind me. So some people like the painting and some don't. Some people like the music and some don't. There's this constant sense of, was this good enough to have people see, read, listen to? If you think about it, science has an element of creativity in there. And I think that that also drives imposter fears. So look at this list. Right? There are so many different things driving us to imposter fears. And I think it is really important to focus on this second bullet. Imposter fears are also driven by the microaggressions we hear, by absent or poor mentoring. It sends a message, you don't belong, if I don't see you and talk with you and mentor you and find time for you. Being in bullying environments, harassing environments, dealing with discrimination, all of these things send a message you don't belong. Imposter fears are this feeling of not belonging. So if someone else is telling you, or many someone else's are telling you don't belong, it makes sense that you start to hear that message. So it's very important to appreciate that, yes, we have distorted thinking that springs from our own cognitive processes, but they are often being driven by other people as well. 70% and probably more would be my guess. Some of us forget the imposter fears we really struggled with. 70% report experiencing imposter fears at some point in their educational and work journey. So I think the really key message about that is there is nothing wrong with you. Having imposter fears does not imply you don't belong. It doesn't imply that there's something wrong with the way you're approaching your work environment. They are a difficult reality of being in new environments with lifelong learning and all kinds of hard things. You're not alone. And that's the other really important message. So let's take a look at how many of us experience imposter fears on the next slide. I think if there's only one thing that comes out of this, it would be to normalize this to some degree. Why? Because as we're willing to talk about them, we find ways to soften them. So look at how many people are saying most days, and we still have lots of people to vote, so we'll give a little bit more time as we watch this poll. So notice there are very few people who said never. It's nice to see some people saying a few days here and there, almost never. It's interesting to hear from them why they think that is, what strategies they have when they do pop up. And the other thing that I think is really important to appreciate is that there are really tried and true ways to deal with imposter fears, to recognize them and start to deal with them. One thing we won't do today, but we do sometimes, is do a separate poll of people more advanced in their careers. The take-home message being they too experience imposter fears. So we're really not alone. This is a lifelong process of recognizing them, softening them, understanding where they come from, and sometimes we don't experience them for a long time and then they pop back up and we want to say, well, why is that? Right? And that could be, well, we have a new boss, so we're paying a lot more attention, or we took on a new job and suddenly, even though the physical environment didn't change, the feeling at work did change. So it's important to appreciate that. Thank you, Uli. The thing is that as we tell distorted stories and as we allow our imposter fears to amplify, we need to look at the consequences because that's really the key thing. If there is no consequence, then it's just a story. The thing is that at times it can feel like these more negative distortions and that they really motivate us to work hard. Right? If we see things as needing to be perfect, all or nothing thinking, if we think, oh, this is going to go terrible and we catastrophize, well, maybe we're going to practice a little bit more. We're going to edit it again. We're going to ask somebody else for their input. It can feel like jackal-like distortions can motivate us to work really extra hard and that that's a good thing. On the flip side, ostrich-like stories, oh, I'm sure it'll be fine. You know, they gave me some critical input, but they also gave me some good input. I'll focus on that. Those ostrich-like distortions can decrease our stress, and they buffer us from having uncomfortable feelings. And in the moment, it makes it easier, right? So ostrich-like stories can really make it easier in the moment. If you think about it, imposter fears, they lead us to hide. Oh, I don't belong, so I won't ask that question. So in the moment, we can feel safer. So in all cases, at times, it can feel like these are helpful. And the honest truth is probably some small amount of various distortions and various distorted stories are likely to be helpful in the moment. The thing is, when they are unchecked and unquestioned, when we let them grow, when they are inappropriately dumped on us by others and we let them grow, then they can hold us back. They can add to our struggle, and they can lead to all kinds of self-sabotaging behavior. Like we don't ask questions, we don't apply for the right fellowships, we lose opportunities, we don't volunteer for assignments or leadership positions. As we dive deeper and deeper into the distorted stories, we withdraw. We use unhealthy behaviors to try and feel better. Sometimes we try to mask those uncomfortable feelings either by overwork, right, of just this furious working to avoid how bad we feel, or we avoid work completely to avoid how bad we feel. And neither of those can be especially helpful. And this can become a really negative cycle, and it can lead to very poor outcomes in school and internships in work and life. So it is really critical that we wrap our head around the distorted stories that we tell. The first step is to really look at the stories we tell. What are our go-to cognitive distortions? How do they play out in our life? How can we become more aware of them? What can we do once we become aware? Journaling can help with that. Some people keep a jackal, giraffe, ostrich log. So if you notice you're beating yourself down, you just you just write jackal. When I couldn't design that primer easily, I totally dumped on myself. Right. So you just keep a log, jackal, giraffe, ostrich. Journaling is just a way of going a little deeper than a log. You want to talk about cognitive distortions and imposter fears. What we don't talk about, we stew on, we are ashamed of. Things that we bring out to conversation, then we have a way in, we can hear from others. Sometimes just hearing myself say something out loud helps me see how unrealistic it is. Whereas when I said it to myself, it sounded pretty good. So talking about it can help. That's one of the real benefits of the Resilient Scientist series discussion groups. I note from feedback from the facilitators last unit that about half of you who registered didn't come. And I hope some of you come this time, that whatever barriers held you back or whatever got in the way the last time, you can make work this time. Because one of the things is that feeling of not being alone helps so much with this. Now, some people really find that distorted stories are getting in their way, and they choose to find a therapist and spend time exploring it. And I think that that can be a critically important step. And I note in the first slide that some of you did reference looking into therapy or starting therapy. And often we spend a lot of time in therapy telling the therapist some distorted stories and having a really safe space to explore them with someone who is educated and knowledgeable and helping us reflect on them. The thing is that as we start to recognize our stories, what we want to do is learn the D of all of this, or disputing them. In some ways, I like to think of that as questioning them or softening them, but it certainly works great to say A, B, C, D. The E in that is then feeling energized. So instead of feeling totally disheartened by a really catastrophizing story, we dispute it, we feel energized to take action. So it's really A, B, C, D, E. So we want to learn to dispute, to question, and soften. I want to just show you how this plays out. So here's, we're going to just start here. Remember, there's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Look at these thoughts. I can't believe I'm getting so little accomplished right now. I won't get my grant in on time. I probably won't have enough to submit for a talk at whatever meeting you go to, the cancer biology meetings, the nursing research meetings, whatever, fill in the blank. I won't have enough to submit for a talk there. I can tell that my PI or my thesis advisor, my faculty advisor, my postdoc advisor is not happy with me at all. I'll never get a job. I'll never get anything done. I won't be successful in science. That's a story that lots of students at some point tell. That leads to feelings like panic and stress and worry, embarrassment. Look at all of these different hard feelings. And that drives really unhelpful behaviors. Can't concentrate, you avoid lab, you avoid your boss, you argue with colleagues, you don't show up at a journal club that usually gives you a great sense of community. Maybe you ignore some really important emails. This is how it can play out. This is a pretty jackal story. Now, here's another way. Oh, I know I haven't been especially productive later, but my research group is a mess. My boss is really unreasonable. I'm sure it'll be a great spring, even if I miss the grant and abstract deadline. Everything will be okay. Now you tell that story and you sort of feel confident. Maybe you even feel overly confident, relaxed, calm, unworried. You ignore, because of that, you ignore exploring needed change. You ignore talking with people you need to talk with. You just continue with work habits that may not be actually all that helpful for you. So that's a really ostrich example of what's going on. Now, what we're aiming for is this. This is sort of the giraffe, right? My performance has been somewhat disappointing. Between the grant, the abstract deadline, and other stuff, I am feeling overwhelmed. I need to regroup. I need to talk with, fill in the blank. Who do we need? Who are the right people? Consider changing my strategy. I also need to talk with my boss soon, but I'm not ready. I'm going to take time to get ready. That's a much more realistic story about feeling overwhelmed and not productive in the moment. Now, you still might feel worried and stressed, embarrassed, and disappointed, right? You're dealing with some hard things, but maybe at the same time, you feel focused and motivated. You feel hopeful. Maybe you feel like you can make the hard decisions, right? Drives behaviors like talking to mentors, reevaluating work strategies, reaching out for support, making a more realistic schedule, dealing with your frustrations through dance, exercise, journaling, whatever. A much more helpful experience, started by what is the story I'm telling about what's happening right now. So when we hear distorted thoughts, what we want to do is pause. And I like to recommend taking a really deep, mindful breath. For me, stretching makes a really big difference. It just lets me slow down for a moment, and then I can acknowledge them. And then, as soon as I've slowed myself down, I can start questioning them. And sometimes I just say jackal, giraffe, or ostrich. What's going on right now? And oh, Sharon, that's a big jackal, right? And sometimes I'll be like, ooh, there's some ostrich here. You should pay attention. The other way to do that, if that doesn't resonate for you or isn't helpful in the moment, I also like to say, okay, Sharon, inner scientist. What's the evidence that this is going to be a total disaster? And this morning, as I was getting a little worried about being locked out and imagining how long I was going to wait for someone to let me in and how it was going to offset my day, I slowed down just enough. I'm like, I should actually check. And I went and said to Jackie, who someday you should all in the chat thank. She makes all of these webinars, sets them all up, makes them work. I said, any chance you saw my keys? Oh, yeah, here they are, right? So my inner scientist of what's the evidence this is going to be a terrible day of not, this could be probably not such a big deal, gave me just enough space to think, let me go check with people who got here earlier. Another one I really like, is there an alternate hypothesis? Is there a more realistic way to think about it? I'm thinking about this one way. Is there a better way? Going back to last week, can I find my growth mindset? I'm so embarrassed by this mistake. I feel like this is an overwhelming setback. Can I find my growth mindset and try to learn from it? Another sort of mantra here that works is realistic or unrealistic. These aren't really mantras as much as questions, but I think of a mantra as anything we pull out to say to help us in the moment hold on. And so in some ways, this really is a mantra. It's not realistic or unrealistic. And usually as a whole, not very realistic at all. Okay, let me take another breath and reason this through. After we realize that the story we're telling is not realistic, then we need to pivot towards something more realistic. Often in the moment, we feel so bad that we really need a little bit of inspiration. And that could be a mantra, an affirmation. It could be a phrase, an image, something that makes us feel calm and capable, right? I have a really nice smooth stone. My wife gave it to me sometime, and for whatever reason, very often when I'm feeling a lot of catastrophizing thoughts, if I just hold on to it for, I don't know, 2 or 3 seconds, it is another reminder to slow down. A mantra, you got this, right? An affirmation. Somebody put one of their stories is a perfect affirmation. I've done hard things before. We hopefully all find ways to use both affirmations and visualization. So affirmations is when we literally tell ourselves we can do this. And there's really, we can do first person affirmations, I got this, or we can do second person, you got this. Hey, Sharon, you got this. There's some science that says for some of us, first person affirmations work, but for others, second person affirmations work better. Why? Because we're all sort of attuned to pleasing others. So when somebody says, don't stop, you can do this, or, take a deep breath and try again, because we've imagined it or said it as second person, it's like, oh, somebody else is telling us. So you might say, I got this, or you might say, you got this. I need to slow down and start over right now in my seminar, or you need to slow down and start over. So first or second person. Now, visualizations is when we literally close our eyes or imagine, without closing our eyes, a scene where we have dealt with the adversity, where we've handled it. Maybe we're getting ready to go talk to our PI, and we're nervous about that. We don't know very much about them at this point. We're pretty new. We have some hard things to talk about, and we visualize us going in, being really clear and direct, making having a really good experience, and we literally visualize it. Now we can do that in the first person. We can imagine ourselves there, right? I'm sitting there, it's going well, or I'm on stage at the meeting and my talk is great and people are cheering. A third person visualization is when we imagine we're a fly on the wall watching. And that can really help. So we imagine we're watching ourselves succeed. A lot of dealing with distorted thoughts is learning to catch them in the moment and work to pause long enough to start working with them or reframing them. And this acronym, I hope, will help. HATS. Hear your negative self-talk or your overly positive, unhelpful self-talk. Hear the story. Appreciate you have a choice to listen or not, right? You don't have to just keep with that story. Talk back. like a realistic giraffe. And sometimes that's all we need. We're in the middle of an experiment. We're totally frazzled. We feel like we can't do it. We hear that negative story. We catch it. We pause. I got this. Let me regroup. Sometimes in the moment, that's all we need. But very, very often, we want to remember this third one: seek help and use resources. HATS. So as we're dealing with our distorted stories, we want to hear them, appreciate we have a choice whether to go with them or rethink them. We want to eventually learn to talk back in a more realistic way, and when needed, seek help. Now, we can notice internal stories. Sometimes we hear a really distorted story coming from others. And I really alluded to this already. I'm going to point it out again, that the culture of science, with a very a tendency towards perfectionism and overwork. So the culture itself can drive a lot of distorted stories that others tell us: discrimination, bias, poor mentoring, people having a bad day and saying things they regret. All of these things can drive distorted stories and imposter fears. The honest truth is, HAT still holds, right? We can hear the jackal in somebody else's story or identify the ostrich. Often we can't hear the ostrich because it's silence, not available for meetings, not giving feedback, but we can appreciate it for what it is, right? Appreciate you have a choice to listen or not, to talk to the other person or not. Not everything somebody says to us is accurate, right? So we can hear it and appreciate that we have a choice. We can talk back, sometimes only to ourselves, right? Sometimes in the moment, we don't feel safe. We're going to talk a lot about assertiveness and responding to feedback in the next 2 units. Sometimes in the moment, we just want to take it in, or we just have to take it in. But we can go later and say, let me question all of that message of not belonging. You're not cut out to be a scientist, right? Where did that come from? What made them say that? Is there data to the contrary? And the S, again, seeks support and community. So HAT still holds, even when distorted stories come from others. Much harder when it comes from a person of hierarchy. And I don't mean to simplify it and imply it's not hard. It is very, very hard. So I wanted to just give you some examples, and some of these are in first person, and some of these are in second person. And these are sort of ways of reframing or responding to really difficult, distorted stories. And we'll start here, right? You notice that you're telling yourself a story full of imposter fears. I don't belong. I shouldn't ask that question. I'm probably going to be the one at the bottom in this class. Nobody is going to want me to do a rotation with them. You notice all kinds of imposter fear like stories. And you say, at least 70% of all people feel like an imposter sometimes. This is a common experience. It's a common part of the postdoc experience or the, first year graduate student experience. And you can either say, I'm not alone, or you're not alone, right? That's just taking those imposter fears and trying to reframe them. Hearing that jackal voice, feeling frustrated. I give you some examples here. Disappointment is sucking out all of my energy, right? I am caught in all or nothing thinking, and all I can think of is the negative. Okay, now pause. What might be helpful? A break, a walk, a deep breath, my imagery, a moment of mindfulness, right? What might be helpful now? Of course, notice this one. A part of me feels like an imposter. Remember that emotional reasoning? I feel like it, so I am. So one way to fight against that is to say, a part of me right now feels like an imposter. Not me, a part of me. This is a really intense place. It's time to reach out and regroup. It's time to talk to my mentor. It's time to revisit some of my previous successes, my strategies for working through hard things. So we find these ways of retelling our stories. And really the way to think about that is reframing. You know, a lot of times now in a conversation with people who've learned this material, you know, we'll get into our own doubling down on our distorted story. And finally, someone will say, let's reframe that a little bit, right? Or can I help you with reframing that? Right. And so as you talk about this with others within your workspace, within your program, you start to help each other with it. And I want to point out one incredibly important thing about all of this, and that is that stories lead to stories. So here you are. I will ignore the thoughts and emotions, but it's a pretty jackal set of thoughts and driving really uncomfortable emotions. And it's driving behaviors that aren't helpful. You're making mistakes, avoiding lab, ignoring emails, arguing with colleagues, avoiding your mentor, etc. The thing is that your mentor sees these behaviors. They have no idea what the thoughts behind it are, what's driving all of this, right? So they are telling their own story. I can't believe Sharon's avoiding me. I can't believe Sharon didn't turn that in when I asked her to. So stories lead to stories. That's one of the key reasons why it's important for us to recognize these before they drive lots of unhelpful behavior for a prolonged period of time. It's also the reason why developing our assertiveness skills and our ability to talk about different things that are impacting our educational experience are important. So stories lead to stories. And this doesn't have to be with somebody, a hierarchy. This could be a friend, right? This could be somebody in your family, right? They see your behaviors and they are interpreting them themselves. They're telling a story. So we've talked a lot about the stories we tell, and we've talked about hats and hearing those stories. We're going to talk just a little bit about rabbits, because magicians, I always am mesmerized by magicians, and they always pull rabbits out of their hats. So we're going to talk about rabbits in a few slides. So there's a really difficult interplay. We tell these often distorted negative stories, and they lead to really uncomfortable feelings like frustration, panic, worry, embarrassment, fear, overwhelm, resignation, shame. These are all really uncomfortable feelings. The interplay of these two drives all of these really unhelpful behaviors. So one thing is the art of reframing and retelling our negative stories. But the second element of our resilience is being able to regulate our emotions, especially when we are being flooded by unhelpful and uncomfortable emotions. Now, remember, all emotions are data points. And actually, I should not even use the word unhelpful, but maybe in the moment unhelpful, right? Fear, imposter fears might be unhelpful when we don't volunteer to lead the group when we're really capable of it. They might be helpful when we realize we're not prepared, and in the moment that lack of preparation is driving some imposter fears, and we decide not to ask that question until we feel a little bit more prepared. So I want to stress that I should probably not use the word helpful. I should probably focus on uncomfortable, because even these uncomfortable feelings can be helpful or unhelpful depending on what we do. So we can have uncomfortable or comfortable emotions, uncomfortable or comfortable thoughts, right? So whatever happens to us over the course of our day, the daily hassles, the setbacks, the really frustrating moments, and daily uplifts, right? We have positive. Every day typically is a mix of these hassles and uplifts, and they drive these stories and emotions that can either be comfortable or uncomfortable. And remember, that then drives our attitudes and behaviors. When we are unaware of our thoughts and emotions, we start to make decisions that are really not driven by a realistic story, right? We want our decisions to be both emotion-based and cognitive, right? Based on our judgment, our ability to slow down, not go with our first response, but evaluate what is the best response. So emotional regulation is our ability to sense emotions, so to awareness of them, accurately interpret them, and then regulate them or err. When this happens, when we are aware of our emotions, and even more so the interplay of our emotions and the stories we're telling, then the awareness is the first step. Then we can sit and say, what is this telling me right now? And how do I want to deal with it? So awareness, interpretation, and regulation. This is especially important for difficult emotions like discomfort, frustration, disappointment, embarrassment, anger, disconnect. Disconnect is the feeling that I like to attach to imposter fears. We feel disconnected from the community because we don't belong in it. The goal, overall goal, is to make good decisions that are based on all of the data, accurate stories, or the cognitive piece, and the emotions that are providing input. And so I want to talk a little bit about what it means to interpret emotions accurately. So really, in some ways, it's that art of a mindful breath. It's pausing to check if our first or automatic interpretation is accurate. So for example, I feel embarrassed, so I should hide. I feel fear, so I should be quiet. I feel angry, so I should speak up. Sometimes that first interpretation is accurate, but sometimes what we really would prefer instead is I feel, same thing, anger, disconnect, fear, frustration, and we pause. Okay, what is that feeling telling me? I will deal with this by. I feel anger. It's telling me I've been wronged. And I have paused long enough to decide, do I want to speak up right now or not? I feel frustration. I should give up. I feel frustration. Maybe I do need to take a break, but maybe I can't take a break. I need to keep going and try a different approach. Maybe I need to go get help. So interpreting emotions accurately means we don't just go with our first interpretation, because we know that often our first interpretation is not especially well thought out, right? It's sort of the immediate response, and that's not always the best response. The way I like to think about this is this key concept of tolerance. Tolerance is the ability to withstand or be with or endure. That's a hard word, endure, but let's be honest, uncomfortable emotions, sometimes it feels like we're really enduring them. It's our ability to withstand or endure uncomfortable or unpleasant emotions, but not just endure them and do nothing. It's endure them while taking helpful actions. The problem is sometimes we say, I am really disconnected. I am really feeling unsupported. I'm feeling all of these uncomfortable emotions, and I'm supposed to just suffer in silence. Tolerance is not that. Tolerance is saying, I am experiencing these uncomfortable and unpleasant emotions. What's the best option? Sometimes that means accepting that the uncomfortable feelings will increase in the short term as you take appropriate action, right? I feel frustrated. I'm really stuck here. This is incredibly important. I need to go talk to someone, and that's uncomfortable. So what did we just do, right? We actually doubled down on the discomfort in the moment. And so it's really important to appreciate tolerance is not suffering no matter what. Tolerance doesn't mean we choose the thing that alleviates the discomfort right away. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. Tolerant means appreciating sometimes what we choose adds to our discomfort in the short term to decrease it in the long term. I think of everything that I've learned in this material and in conversations with so many students who've participated in this, is that this concept of tolerance really means finding ways to sit in the moment, feeling really, really stressed. And that brings up this idea that there's a kind of stress, eustress, that is helpful. It focuses us, it energizes us, it makes us take action. It might not feel great in the moment, but it's within our capacity to handle it. And when we never deal with issues, it can lead to distress or stress beyond control. And I think that that concept of tolerance plays a lot into how we manage the difficult stress in the moment that we need to deal with, so we don't land in the end into this really distressed, stuck, caught place. Tolerating hard things in the moment so that we have a chance of something better. Tolerance means that we modulate our responses in the moment. Or really, I should go with the slide. Tolerance allows us to. It means that we find ways to modulate our response in the moment so we avoid unhelpful behaviors and initiate helpful ones. Tolerance, I think, is a really important concept, and so I want to give a few examples. So frustration tolerance is our ability to deal with delays and address obstacles calmly. It's also our ability to put hassles and slights into perspective so they can be dealt with or let go of. Right? Sometimes somebody in lab says something that really irritates us. We're so frustrated with them in the moment, but do we really want to lash out? We want to put it into perspective, sit with it for a moment so we can take appropriate action. So frustration tolerance can be about something happening to us by someone else, or just something we're experiencing. Whenever I lose my keys, which is a lot, unfortunately, my frustration goes way up, and then I do things totally unhelpful and I never find my keys. And on top of that, anyone around me has to feel some of that frustration. So frustration tolerance is both things that people say and do to us, but also things that just happen. Discomfort tolerance is accepting uncomfortable feelings while we persist in a task that's important to us. I really need to have present this poster, get feedback, meet people. It's making me very uncomfortable. And I really want to go to the end of the aisle and hide. I really want to ignore people pausing so they don't stop. But this is an important task for me. It's our ability to put aside unhelpful thoughts and actions that block important ones. It makes me feel so uncomfortable to go talk with my program director about what's happening in my graduate experience right now. It makes me so uncomfortable that I'm not going to do it. But here's the thing, I really need to talk with them. Discomfort tolerance is the ability to go and do that. Fear tolerance, I think this one is really important when it comes to imposter fears. It's our ability to acknowledge fear and decide whether that fear is fully warranted, partially warranted, or not warranted at all. So the beginning of graduate school, you're in a class, you don't feel like you have the best background in that class. Some people do, or seem to, at least in the moment, triggering a lot of imposter fears. Fear tolerance is the ability to acknowledge that fear. Is this warranted at all? Well, not really. We're all first-year students, right? We all are learning, right? Or is it partially warranted? Well, I'm not prepared and that's triggering a little bit. And next time I'd like to come better prepared. Or, not warranted, right? Fully warranted, partially warranted, or not warranted. Sometimes we feel fear and somebody's really angry with us. The stakes are very, very high. And we choose in that moment to accept that fear is telling us to be quiet, and that's a good idea. So tolerance is the ability to decide what's the best action in the moment. In some ways, it's looking at what the possible message is and finding alternate messages. So a possible message for discomfort is, I feel uncomfortable, I should stop. An alternate message is, I feel uncomfortable, but this is important and I need to stick with it, or I need to get support, or I need to regroup. Couple things to think about there. The whole concept of growth mindset, right? When we can reframe challenges in learning, right? It can help a lot. Another thing was one of those came up right at the beginning, one of those quotes from the start, right? Well, I've done hard things before, I can do it again. So this discomfort isn't a stop signal. Embarrassment. I think this is a key one for students. We feel embarrassed a lot, right? I think it's human nature. I think it's so illustrated by when we trip, the first thing we do is look around, right? We want to make sure nobody saw us trip, even though the sidewalk was uneven, right? And it, you know, or our shoelace was untied. And really what we should do is, you know, if we need help, hope there's someone around, but generally we just hope no one is around. A possible message, I feel embarrassed, I need to hide. An alternate message, I feel embarrassed, I wish this hadn't happened, I need to find support, or I need help. So two things there. One is self-compassion. We all make mistakes. We all have hard days. We all, you know, have come easies and come hards, and there's gonna be embarrassment in our work life, in our personal life. So self-compassion, right? That ability to appreciate that we all come with flaws, that we all have come hards. The other thing that I think helps with embarrassment is remembering that perfection does not exist, right? Everyone makes mistakes. A lot of times people dump embarrassment on us. Remember that whole idea that distorted stories are dumped on us. How could you have made that mistake? I can't believe you did that. Every other student knows that, right? You know, the honest truth is that's somebody forgetting that we all make mistakes, also forgetting probably that they make mistakes and have made and are still making. So a lot of that's an alternate message around embarrassment. And all of the things that we deal with that are really uncomfortable, we always want to pause and say, so right now, all of what's happening in my body, because emotions are felt in our body, right? That churning in my stomach, or that my shoulders all the way up inside my ears. It's telling me a message, but I got to decode it the right way. I have to take appropriate action, and tolerance helps us to do that. So tolerance is helpful when we need to talk to a mentor or teacher, a program director about progress and experience. It's really helpful when dealing with vulnerability, that we need to ask for help, join groups, use resources. Tolerance is helpful when we have to accept difficult outcomes and go talk about them, right? Tolerance is helpful when we have to hear difficult but helpful or accurate feedback, right? And engaging with others to address it. It is a learned skill. Tolerance requires self-awareness and self-compassion. It also requires a willingness to take small calculated risks. It's good to practice in low-stakes situations. It's good to seek advice and support. A big element of tolerance is practicing our assertiveness skills and realizing that we have the ability to develop our assertiveness skills further. I think tolerance is also involves curiosity to try new things. I wonder what would happen if I responded differently this time. I wonder what would happen if, instead of hiding after I have a setback, I go to a mentor and say, I want to hide, but I think I probably need to talk with you. It's a little bit of a curiosity thing. So that's where the rabbits come in. When it comes to our feelings, our goal is rabbits. We want to recognize our feelings, acknowledge them. Breathe deeply and be with them. That means don't suppress them or judge them. That's one of the big benefits of mindfulness. It teaches us to say, I am feeling really disappointed with this person right now, or I'm feeling really disappointed with myself. I'm feeling really disconnected. I'm sitting with some hard things. The I is interpreting emotions accurately, right? Making sure our first interpretation isn't the only one we consider. And then the T is take action or not, right? Maybe the take action is no action, taking a break, going away, reflecting. And then again, just like in hats, the S was seek support and guidance. The S in rabbits, seek support and guidance. So we talked about hats, and now we've talked about rabbits. I think that it's really important to end a discussion about how emotions play into our stories by acknowledging the very painful emotion of shame. This is experienced by everyone, and it creates a real sense of fear and disconnection. Shame is about who we are. Shame comes with the unhelpful stories we tell ourselves, and shame really makes it even harder to deal with those stories. Shame tells us that we are flawed and that we are unworthy of acceptance and belonging, that something is really wrong with us. We have shame about who we are. We have shame about things that have happened to us. We carry so much shame, and I see so much shame in the workspace, in students who don't reach out for help and support. There's a great set of literature on shame that comes out of the work and writings of Brene Brown. Shame, I think, has to be dealt with through self-compassion. So I also wanted to give you a link to the work by Dr. Kristen Neff, who does research on self-compassion. You know, even talking about shame in the webinar, I think, can be difficult. Because when shame comes up, we really want to hide. Shame in educational and research environments happens around the fact that we need help, the fact that things come hard to us. We have shame about needing breaks and time away. I think we talked about well-being, we put together those collages, we all tried new things. The honest truth is, though, in the back of our mind, I should be working, right? I'm not good enough because I need a break. There's shame in research spaces around what career choice we make. There's this feeling there's only one right outcome, right? Often people have shame around struggles they have with their PI. It must be me. I'm flawed, right? I don't belong here. I'm not worthy of being here. And I know I missed some. And so I think it's really important to acknowledge how difficult a feeling shame is and how it short circuits growth. And this comes from data from a year ago in the Resilient Scientist series, when we said, why don't you reach out for help when you need it? And we looked at lots of responses and binned them, and fear and shame were at the top. We feel so unworthy of being in the space when the opposite should be. We need all of you. We need your creative energies, your questions, your way of seeing the world. We need you with your come easies and your come hards. But somehow our culture sends a different message. It drives a lot of shame, and it drives people to hide. Shame resilience is the ability for us to connect with who we really are, to stop hiding, to have self-compassion, to reach out and put into perspective all of the things that we are, that have happened to us, that we struggle with. It allows us to see our struggles and our successes. A big part of shame resilience is learning how to talk about what's happened to us, put it into perspective, to practice self-compassion, etc. One of the things so ironic to me when I think about some of my shame stories, and we all have shame stories, right? It took me into my 40s to come out as a member of the queer community, right? It turns out to be a strength story, right? I found a way to tap into my authentic self. Everything about my life is better, right? But that hiding felt so necessary at the time. When we feel shame, we feel like we need to hide. And when we hide, we don't seek resources or community. And so I think we all have this way of hiding because of our shame stories, but so many of them are really strength stories. So we all have to find a way in. That's by learning reframing. That's by learning emotional regulation. That's by practicing behaviors that help us improve our thoughts and our emotional regulation. We find a way in all three parts here. That's a really key thing. I wanted to give you a journaling prompt to wrap up today. And I also wanted to invite you to an online Zumba that we're going to host this Friday, noon Eastern time. So I know that's pretty early on the West Coast, but you could start your morning by dancing. You know, so many things come out of Zumba. First, physical well-being, connection to others, lovely music. I also think for some people like me, a chance to practice discomfort tolerance. Here I am. We did Zumba outside on the lawn earlier this week. You know, I have a lot of come easies, but I have some come hards, and dancing would be a come hard for me. Zumba is something that makes me feel very vulnerable and uncomfortable, but there I was. And, you know, if I hadn't gotten over the discomfort, I wouldn't have had all those amazing moments of connection and laughter. I wouldn't have gotten so much out of the event. So I think it's beyond exercise and music, etc. It can be a chance to practice discomfort tolerance. So I want to wrap up and handle the Q&A. I know some of you will run, but we have 15 more minutes. So I will take a bunch of the Q&A. Please give me some feedback. I do pay attention to it, and we appreciate you being here. The first question is, how do we get the worksheet for the unit? We are running behind. So about a week from now, plus minus, Uli will email out the workbook, but you will get the slides immediately tomorrow. I have no idea if cameras and mics are automatically off, so I can't help. Can you nudge me? I don't know. This is something you'll have to put it in again, something about nudge me to research on imposter fears. So go ahead and put the question in again, or email me. I have a hard time with all the negative thinking because we're able to select which facts to consider and disregard the others. You know, the fact that we're able to do that, I mean, it's true. We have the ability to look at all the facts in front of us and reason through them. But the honest truth is that we tend, because of all of the really quick decisions we make, because of our tendencies to distortions, we tend to focus on some facts and not others. So we need to slow down so that we focus on the right ones. Do cognitive distortions ever go away, or is this a lifelong journey? You know, I'm not a cognitive distortion researcher, but my sense, being somewhat farther along in life and spending a lot of time reading on this, that this is a lifelong journey that often does get easier. We do find strategies that work. We incorporate well-being practices that help us deal with them. You know, I was talking with a therapist that I meet with the other day, and I said, I bike to work every day, and I've noticed that that's helping me sleep better. Those two things together are really softening some distortions that I was really getting caught in. So I feel like what happens, yes, they happen forever. A, we recognize them better. B, we handle them better. C, we have more and more proactive strategies. Talking myself out of distortions is exhausting, is the next comment. And I could not agree with you more. And my hope is that as you work with the material here and in other spaces where you're getting support, that you'll find ways to make it a little bit less exhausting. I find sometimes that laughing about them is a little bit helpful for me in the moment. Oh, Sharon, there you are catastrophizing again. I wonder what would happen in the world if all of your catastrophes came true. That makes it a little bit less exhausting. Sometimes we need a lot of support to get to the point where they're not exhausting. When I hear imposter fears, it makes me think of some of the newer material I've been looking into related to psychological safety. You may get to this, but I'm curious about what your thoughts are on how we can foster psychological safety in our environments from bottom up. Seems like it's often fostered from top down. I will, as we talk about more about assertiveness, allude to elements of safety, right? We need to feel safe, psychologically safe, also career safe and physically safe to really take risks. And a part of that is having the ability to reach out to others, to talk about things that are happening. A part of that is our ability to speak up in the moment. I think psychological safety from the bottom up comes from things like the Resilient Scientist series groups, where people show up to share with each other, peer mentoring programs, affinity groups on campus, various activities that trainees organize for other trainees. The beauty of all the postdoc associations, including ours, FELCOM, planning events for National Postdoc Appreciation Week, are spaces to make connections and provide psychological safety. I think trainees who feel empowered to share some of this material with their PIs and other supervisors can help, right? It comes from the bottom up. You need to be aware of this, and maybe it then lands and trickles down. And that happens. There are PIs who email me and say, my trainee shared your slides. Do you teach this to PIs? So I do think psychological safety goes both ways. And I think you're right. Imposter fears are all about not feeling safe in the moment. Is that a distortion when you have feelings that you don't belong, or is it a realistic feeling? I think you might be asking a little bit, I could be getting this wrong. How do you know when this feeling I don't belong here is an accurate feeling versus a distorted thought? That's true about everything here. And sometimes we have a feeling that we don't belong, and we don't, right? We rotate and, oh, this doesn't feel like I belong here. I want to move on. Or I feel like this career isn't right for me. I want to move on. Sometimes it is a really realistic, accurate reflection. The way we sort it out is by asking ourselves, over time, what happens as I question this? Have I talked to others and listened to their questions about it and reflected back? What work have I done to feel like I belong here? I think that we sort out our sense of belonging over time. I think the problem is, and why that's so hard to do, is that we can get so caught in the negative, toxic feelings of not belonging that we don't pause to ask why. I also think that in some ways the culture drives that, because let's be honest, we have too much incivility and unwelcoming behavior directed against all trainees, but especially trainees who are different, who don't fit the mold that scientists developed decades ago and sometimes still hold on to, whether intentionally or not. So I think that sometimes feelings of not belonging are really helpful, and they drive us to take action of getting out of the environment, but we want to be certain by pausing. Amplifying some of the questions posted on Slido, is there a way of distinguishing between untrue and ones that are true but unhelpful all the same? I tend to have overly negative or overly positive thoughts, but not in between. I feel they feed each other. How can I find balance? I think it goes back a little bit to that feeling of the comment I just made about needing to sit with it long enough. So I would say that's not really an in the moment one situation thing. I would encourage you to journal both about some of your really negative distortions and then your really positive ones. And I would go all the way to, so what happened, right? What was the outcome, and how helpful was this really negative distortion, or how helpful was this really positive distortion? Sometimes I think really positive distortions do help, just like really negative distortions can help. But you need to ask yourself, not focusing on the one time, see proof, but over time, do I really need to rein it in? And my guess is you'll land on a few isolated cases where both of them really helped. And then a feeling that maybe if I could rein it in a little bit. So I think rather than balance, you might think of softening the stories and pulling it in a little bit. Is there a positive aspect to imposter fears? I can think of times. So I'll go back to graduate school for me. I didn't come in with the best of preparations based on experiences in high school and difficulties I had in college. And I didn't really have the best major in terms of getting a good background in a lot of the basic sciences. And so we had a biochemistry class in the first year of grad school, and the teacher said, if you haven't had biochemistry before, you're likely to really struggle a lot. And I already was feeling imposter fears, but I can tell you that comment like amplified them log units. So in the short term, the positive element of that for me was I got awfully serious about studying. Way more serious than I ever was as an undergraduate. And I very quickly saw a lot of flaws in my study habits, which made sense because I had a lot of issues with things in college. So I would say in the moment, those imposter fears triggered me to take a really helpful action. But if instead I had said, oh my God, I don't belong, let me just give up, right? They wouldn't have been. So I could say that in talking with people and reflecting on my own experiences, that there's always, there always can be something helpful, even if it seems like it wouldn't be. The question is, you need to ask yourself, is this really helping me or not? Amplifying a question from the chat, how do we deal with the fear procrastination fear cycle? That's a really great way of framing something that happens to a lot of us. The honest truth is probably perfectionism fits in there. So we have fear that it's not perfect. We want it to be perfect, so we don't start. So we run out of time, making it even harder. So I think it starts with some elements of self-awareness and self-compassion. It doesn't start by taking action. It starts by understanding where it comes from. Then I think as you accept a little bit about where it comes from and why your tendencies, then there's a lot of things that can help, from dealing with, the fear, right? I mean, in some ways you could, there's the anxiety or the fear of what's going to happen. And then it's just how that makes you feel. So what can you do when you feel totally unfocused because of fear? Does a moment of meditation help? Does a quick walk around campus help? Does turning on your power music help? For some reason lately, I have a lot of earworms, and some of them are real puzzles to me, but for some reason lately, there's an earworm, and I can't remember the song totally, but it's a beautiful morning. But I will use that actually even at night when I get caught in a really hard cycle. I don't know, it makes me smile. So you need a set of things to get you started. Sometimes procrastination needs to be dealt with time management systems and reward systems, but it starts by the self-compassion of this is something I need to work on. For those of you at NIH, you know, we offer these resilience skills groups where we dive deeper into a topic. We plan to tie the resilience skills groups in the winter to some of the themes here, and I think we will have one on procrastination and perfectionism. We're going to look at capacity and think about ways to invite people from other places. Also, if you're going to be at the American Society for Cell Biology, we are going to do a talk on perfectionism that will touch on procrastination. Could you please clarify how we can consciously distinguish between untrue negative thoughts and negative thoughts that are true but unhelpful and or lead us to maladaptive behaviors? Again, I think I highlighted this a little bit. It's really sitting with people that you trust long enough to decide what part of this story just is. Like, I mean, the honest truth is there are things we're not good at. And yes, growth mindset, we can get better at it, but it's a struggle right now. Some element of resilience is it just is what it is. I think often there's some truth in the distorted story. It's just that the truth has been amplified. And again, I think so much of this is pausing and reflecting. On the subject of finding a therapist, do you know any resources to get around the struggle of insurance issues? In my case, having the graduate student health insurance, which does not cover therapy, and feeling that the student counseling center isn't quite what I need. You know, one of the really, I think, big issues facing our country is the lack of enough mental health professionals with appropriate expertise, identities, and experiences that resonate for each client, and who take the insurance that we have. That mismatch exists a lot. So you can ask if there is someone who accepts individuals on a sliding scale. Some people will choose to start with a group, which is more affordable. There are resources online to try to match you with folks who might have your expertise. Sadly, I think a lot of times people say it's just not right, and fit matters so much. One last thing I would say is schools need feedback about what doesn't work. You know, just like OITE needs feedback from trainees about what's not working, your school needs feedback about what's not working. And if your student health center doesn't work and you don't have insurance, people in leadership positions need to know. And I know that won't solve the problem in the short term, but it might help in the longer term. I would really encourage inquiries about sliding scales, being clear about that you don't have insurance, and asking what they can do to help. How can we deal with procrastination from fear of perception in the field that we work in? I think I addressed some things about perfectionism, so I won't answer that again. There's a thing in there about using Psychology Today. I will definitely echo. I have used Psychology Today and use it at times as I help students. And sometimes the insurance information is accurate and sometimes it's not. So you'll always want to check and double check. I would actually add one other thing. You can ask people in your student counseling center to help you find somebody outside that might be helpful, or others that you know. You know, if somebody says, I'm sorry, I don't have any openings, you could respond back and say, you have the expertise that I'm really looking for. Do you have any other suggestions? And that might help. They might give you some referrals. Do you have any advice for how to approach a mentor who is absent? I feel like a lot of imposter fears and disconnection exist in our lab. I think a lot of it has to do with the absence of my mentor. Yeah, we're going to talk about assertiveness next time, and I'm going to introduce the concept of risk reward scaffold. So what is the risk of telling my mentor, I think your absence is driving issues here, right? What is the risk, but what are the rewards? What is the risk of not talking? What are the rewards? So it's somewhat context specific. I don't know your PI. Some PIs would hear this and make change. Some PIs wouldn't handle it well, and it might not be the best first strategy. So I would encourage you, to come back, because it's a good discussion of assertiveness that we need to have, that will start, and that I think really needs to be had. Also, think about people on your campus who might be able to advise you a little bit. So are there, remember, hats, S, seek help, rabbits, S, seek help, growth mindset, a willingness to seek help. So much of resilience is a willingness to discuss things with helpful people. So are there people you could strategize with? Reshame, you asked on your slide, what did I miss? You're right, I did, and I didn't address that. There's a lot of shame and disappointment aimed at scientists who decide to leave the academic pipeline. I think I wasn't explicit. That's really shame about career decision making, and I agree with you. I think that we need to undo that shame by largely saying there's no such thing as an alternative career, and academic careers are not better than any other career. They're a career choice. And yes, they are a career choice that many in our field think is better, but many people have come to appreciate that there's no truth to that. And I hope we can do away with that shame by really stressing there's no such thing as an alternative career. Any career that makes you happy is a good career choice. So thank you for making me be more explicit about that. How do you prioritize taking care of your mental health when you feel like you don't have enough energy to complete all of the tasks at work? I think that's an incredibly hard thing. Just when we need to take care of ourselves is when we don't have the energy to take care of ourselves. And so find some support. Tell someone how much you're struggling. Get some help in prioritizing taking care of yourself, and appreciate that, if you don't find the time, you don't carve out the time, you don't set healthy boundaries, all of which are hard to do. So I don't want to belittle the challenge that you face, but if you don't find the time, things may never get better, and you will be stuck in a really hard space for a long time. And, maybe we start with small things, right? I mean, we did that wellness assessment, and there's a lot of small things that we can start with. Maybe we ask for help. That's our one start thing. And so I think that what we need to do is ask ourselves, what's the consequence of not doing anything here? And sometimes when we ask ourselves, what's the consequence of not doing anything, it's so much easier for us to lean into the hard things and do what we need to do. I certainly feel that for myself a lot. I've seen that happen in the past for me. And I think that's true for many people. I have been feeling like my lab is putting the responsibility on me to reach out and create a sense of belonging. Is it unrealistic to expect my PI to initiate creating a sense of belonging, especially being the only person of color on my team? I would wish and hope that in every group, the leader, whether that's a PI in a research lab or the boss in an office like the OITE, that the leader would always say, it's on me to help build a sense of community. That's hard for everyone, but that is especially hard when you're the only person of color, the only person with a particular identity. I mean, it's so hard to feel like you belong when you come into a new environment, and difference makes that even harder. So I wish that every PI put energy into this. Some are ostriches in every way. And so is it your responsibility? No. Would it be helpful for you to reach out and try? Yes. If you're rotating, is this sending you a message about whether you should stay? Yes, right? Depending on your situation, maybe you'll decide not to try and you have the ability to move on, but maybe you've decided you're there. And so, yeah, I think it's worth it. I think it's also worth pointing out to your PI that you're struggling with that and asking for input and advice. But in the mentoring environment I dream of there being in science, it wouldn't be your responsibility. And I'm sorry that you feel that it is. You know, I run a course called Raising a Resilient Scientist, and I'm going to snap a picture right now of that question, and I'm going to add it into my talk on building belonging in diverse research groups. How can we get feedback about what's not working without fear of retaliation? You know, we are going to talk a lot about that in the assertiveness course. So given that we're over time, I'm going to ask you to come back. Again, there's so much context of who we're asking, so it's a little bit of a lengthy answer. So a lot of you stayed for a long time. Thank you for spending the afternoon with me. I always feel both hopeful and a tiny little bit disheartened after these webinars. Hopeful because you asked so many good questions and you're working so hard to thrive in this research space, and a little bit disheartened because I think we make it hard at times. I know we make it hard at times. So have a really great week. Please join me for Zumba on Friday. It will be super fun. And I hope to see you there. We'll host some other wellness activities and community activities. Please come to the groups next week. I just put the journaling prompt up again because somebody asked. It's in the slides. So thank you, everyone. Take good care, and I will see you in 2 weeks.